So today, it is an honor for me to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. R. Taniguchi. He is the Honorary Consul General of Japan at Hilo, a position that he has held since 2010. He is currently serving in his third 5-year term. Art is a very active member of the Honpan Honganji Hilo Betsuin, having served as its immediate past president among many leadership positions in the many Japanese civic organizations in Hilo. He is also community-oriented and has been the past president or director of the Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Hawaii, the Japanese Community Association of Hawaii, the East Hawaii Hiroshima Kenjin-kai, Crime Stoppers Hilo, and Hawaii Island Chamber of Commerce. He also currently serves as the president of the Uresenki Hilo Association. Art's career has always been in the banking and financial field. He previously worked for AFCO Financial Services in Hawaii, Japan, and California for 16.5 years, and also was vice president of Pioneer Federal Savings Bank for 3 years. Recently, he was the senior vice president and regional manager of Bank of Hawaii, from which he retired in 2018 after 27 years. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Art Taniguchi.
Thank you, Claudia. Good morning, everyone. I'll put my glasses on so I can see. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces here this morning. We used to come when our kids were young, they wanted to be perfect attendance every week, so they would come here when we were in Kona and mainland. We'd try to stop into one of those temples and everything. But I think the last official time we came was when we brought Takamiyama to Kona, and many of you came and met him here. He had a great time when he visited, and he's such a gentleman. It was just a pleasure to have him visit us over here on the Big Island. When Claudia reached out to Wayne Miao and myself to see if we could be a guest speaker for the service, I figured, oh man, she must have called everybody and then finally scraped the bottom of the barrel and asked us. But, at that time, we were in the middle of this fundraising effort for the Sadako Legacy Project. And, of course, you all know the story of Sadako. But basically, Bishop Matsumoto, who's a Kona boy, was contacted by Sadako's nephew, Yuji Sasaki. And he wanted to do a documentary film on Sadako's life, as well as put a monument with an eternal flame here in Hawaii. The documentary was going to take into account interviews from Hawaii side as well as the Japan side, yeah. And some of the interviews have already taken place. So they asked Bishop for some help. So he kind of pulled myself and Wayne Miao from Honolulu to assist in a fundraising effort. We did from Oahu and the Big Island only. We didn't do Maui or Kauai. But fortunately, we were able to hit our goal. And we wanted to thank Kona Honganji as well as their members and the members of the community for your support. Really appreciate it. Although I'm one of the bottom of the barrel speakers, it's very humbling and an honor to be asked to speak to you today. You have a fine temple here. You have a fine new minister in Reverend Blaine. The first time I met him and actually heard him speak was at my first Gisekai, or one of the first Gisekais in Honolulu. He was the guest speaker or the morning speaker at the service. And I thought he was from the mainland. He was so articulate and everything. So I went up to him, introduced myself, and said, wow, you did a terrific talk. And, then he told me, oh, I'm from Hilo. and then he goes, oh, my mother's name is Elsie. Now, probably most of you folks don't know Elsie, but Elsie Higa was like a longtime Bank of Hawaii. She ran our Waikea branch. And so, what a small world. And And Reverend Blame's auntie, Joyce Kaitoku, was one of my closest colleagues at Bank of Hawaii all the way through my career. So, it's really a pleasure to come and speak with you today. So instead of digressing more, let's get started. On August 6, 1945 at 8:15 a.m. Japan time, the first atomic bomb in history was detonated over Hiroshima. On August 9th, a second atomic bomb was detonated over Nagasaki. These bombs caused tremendous damage and casualties and were the only atomic bombs used against humanity. Prayers are made every year on the anniversary dates of these two tragic events around the world, and in the name of peace, and that these types of weapons will never again be used against humanity. When I was thinking of what I should speak about today, I think most of us kind of know that the bomb tragically was dropped in Hiroshima, and the damage it caused and casualties. So I thought instead of that, maybe what I'll do is kind of share some of my personal stories that I've heard personally with our family and friends. My dad, as many of you know, was raised in Hiroshima, but came to Hawaii before the war. But we have relatives that survived the war. As an example, my father's cousin, Koji, was an elementary school student. And, I met him when I was small, and, I was elementary time, but he was already an adult. And basically he told me, yeah, he was in the schoolyard playing, and, the bomb, as you know, was dropped by parachute. And so it exploded in the air. So he said, after it exploded, he said it was like snowflakes falling down. And, when the snowflakes, when it hit your skin, then it burned, yeah? So he said, and then of course, as you know, there was great damage and everything else. But basically for him, when I first met him, he was jolly, big, husky, jolly. He had several children, married. None of them had any illnesses until maybe he hit his 70s. Then he contracted leukemia. And for the most part, he had a normal life, good life, but the last couple of years was bad. But I think for him, I always knew him as a jolly guy, joking, big, husky guy, and laughing, and very kind to me the numerous times that I had seen him. My great-grandmother, when I first went back to Japan as a kid, was still alive, and she recounted too that during the war, of course, food was very scarce here in Hiroshima already after the bomb. And so even the grass next to the railroad tracks, on the side of the tracks, there was no grass because people would pick that and eat for food because, again, food was very scarce. In 1999, our family went on a conference to Japan, and then we went to Hiroshima to visit relatives. And we had a memorial service at our family temple in Hiroshima. It's in a place called Jigozen. It's used to be country, now it's suburb of Hiroshima City, close to Miyajima side. And so the reverend over there is this young man, but his father was the retired reverend, and he wanted to conduct the service for us. So Jennifer was young yet, and my mom came with us as well. And so the reverend shared at that time that his family, in Japan, the temples are run by family, yeah? So in other words, generation to generation. But anyway, the same family had been doing this temple for over 500 years. And I thought that was amazing, So I shared this story the other week with, we're in a meeting in Hilo Honganji with Reverend Tomioka, who's Puna Honganji, Reverend Kamuro, who's Hilo, as well as our Rimbang head minister, Takahashi. Those three ministers' families, temple started in the 1600s. I mean, that is amazing. And they're saying they're the whatever generation or whatever. And usually the ones that come here from Japan aren't the oldest son, because usually the oldest son has to take over. But I thought, of course, that is something else, but it's just amazing how that kind of, generations can perpetuate their family temples. Anyway, the Reverend shared that during the war, you know, the bells that we have here, the temple bells, the temples all had to turn the bells over to the government, you know, so they could make bullets or whatever. So they didn't have any bells anymore. And so he said, you know, of course, after the war, they didn't have a bell, but they were so appreciative that actually my dad's uncle, Koichi Taniguchi, who started KTA over here, they donated the bell to our family temple in Hiroshima. So their bell is kind of high. So they made all of us climb up the steps, including my mother, and to ring the bell. And they were so happy. And they made us read the back of the bell. There's inscribed, you know, into the bell, the names of Koichi, of course, his wife, Tanio, and my cousin Barry's dad, the oldest son's name. So the three names were inscribed on the back of the bell. But they were so appreciative that they could get one bell when they had nothing. And those bells, you know, of course, are expensive. Today it might be way more expensive, but even back then I think it was expensive. So anyway, at that time, you know, they did the service, and, you know, all in Japanese, so my wife and kids couldn't understand most of what was going on. But then he presented us with this shikisho here. He gave my mom one and he gave me one. And this is in 1999. And never, of course, I opened it, looked at it, but that was about it. And my mom, unfortunately, when we came back that week, she passed away. So one went with her when we cremated her, I put into her casket. But the other one I had all these years. And then when I served as Honganji president, Hilo Honganji president, a few years ago, maybe about 4 years ago, took him out for the first time to use it. And so I'm wearing this at the convention, Gisekai convention in Honolulu. And Reverend Hironaka, he's one of our reverends, he used to be a young one in Hilo. Now I think he's in, where is he? In Maui or something, yeah? Lahaina. Okay, so anyway, he comes up, he said, where did you get this shikisho? So I said, oh, you know, our family temple minister gave us this in 1999. Apparently, this was a commemorative 50-year anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. So during that anniversary, all the ministers that were from Hiroshima got this. You know, so the Reverend was nice. And I didn't know until Reverend I told me that. So, you know, I figured it was appropriate that I wear this one today too, because, you know, it was like, wow, you know, how amazing. But all of them, including like Reverend Reverend Sogas from there, Reverend Munetos from Hiroshima, they probably all got one too back, you know, probably 20-something years ago, and it was 50th anniversary. And also at that time, he shared with us, he says, yeah, they had this big tree that was kind of rotting already, an old tree in their yard. So rather than, they had to cut it down, but rather than just discard it, he said, mottainai, you know, in other words, it's wasteful to just throw it away. So they made nenjus out of it. So this is one of them. And then, so they gave us this, and then it has the name of the temple, yeah, on top. So it's like, wow, you know, all of these things kind of relate back. They're kind of related. And I thought I'd share that with you this morning. After that, we visited the Peace Park and Atomic Bomb Museum in the city, Hiroshima City, which I'm sure many of you have visited. And we went along with our my dad's cousin. And for personal reasons, all those years, she never visited the museum or the park. However, because my mom was with us, she decided to come. And then she gave us her first-hand account, because she's also a survivor of the bombing of that, you know, fateful day. Yeah? So basically what happened, she said, she was washing dishes, and, you know, of course the bomb went off, so the glass shattered and it went inside her throat over here. So she had to have like 3 operations to finally get all of the different, you know, the glass out of her throat. But, you know, she survived. She wasn't burned or anything, you know. Her brother, of course, Koji, the one I mentioned earlier, that was healthy, he was a school child, but he was burned really bad. And, you know, I see some young ones here, so I didn't want to go into the gross details of his thing, but he survived. He was on his back for 1.5 years. and finally, was able to come up and live mostly a normal life. But anyway, she was telling us about these, horses or whatever dead animals coming, flowing down the river. And those of you that went to the Peace Park, it's nice, sandy kind of ground. And then, so we were there, and then she said, this area here was a mass grave, so all these dead bodies were just piled up over there. So they had to do a mass cremation, and that's where we're standing. And then she said, and everybody, at that time they were yelling for water, water. So there's lots of water fountains in the Peace Park. If you visit, then you're going to notice that. And it's like coming from somebody that was there, didn't want to go because I guess personal reasons. But then she shared that with us. She said, wow, so it brought a different perspective to us as we were touring the facilities. What happened next is, as we're coming out of the museum, right as you're exiting, right before you come out, there's a display of a young elementary school boy, his uniform, and he passed away in the blast. And she goes, oh, that boy was Koji's classmate. So that boy passed away, but her brother survived, So, it's just one of those things that, is unfortunate. So anyway, also, when you're coming out of the museum, right before you exit, there's a book that you can put any kind of comments you want there before you leave. And people from all over the world visit the museum. And, really, when you think about it, it's like they overwhelmingly mention that you shouldn't have nuclear weapons in the world, never use this kind of weapons. So most of those comments from people all over the world are state that, So when you think about it, here we had my dad's cousin, took us to the museum or accompanied us to the museum after how many years of not wanting to do that for whatever reason. I think it gave her some closure at that time, finally, that, okay, she went there, went through the museum and everything. And so it gave her a bit of closure. So after that, what happened was she volunteered to be a docent at the museum. And so, in Japan, they always have these school excursions. So what happens is when the students come, then she can talk to them and give them their firsthand account of her experiences during the atomic bomb. But I think, these are just some of the stories that I personally have heard, from people there, as well as, from our background in Hiroshima. But I just wanted to share that because I figured I might as well do that rather than go over Sadako's story and everything else. In 2013, Sadako's older brother, came to Pearl Harbor. I think many of you heard it on the news. I was really privileged to have been able to attend that ceremony. It was a very touching ceremony in which the brother presented one of the cranes that Sadako had folded to the Pearl Harbor Museum at the Arizona Memorial. And what happened was, it was a tiny one. It's only about 1 centimeter big. So there's an exhibit with a light shining on it, and it's a permanent exhibit now at Pearl Harbor. But in Mr. Sasaki's speech, he mentioned the pain and suffering that his country had placed on America, as well as, of course, his country suffered with the atomic bomb. However, he said he hopes that this little gesture in the name of peace can bring closure to both sides and bring peace to the world. So I thought that was a really good speech that he gave at that Arizona Memorial. I was kind of looking up certain things when we were doing the Sadako Legacy fundraising. And apparently there were several cranes that he had donated to other parts of the world in the name of peace. And something interesting is that he said, during the time she was in the hospital, they didn't have origami paper like we have now. So in Japan, they have, their medicine. Most of the medicine is powdered, and then they have it folded inside paper, yeah? So she was using that paper, any kind of paper, but even that paper to fold a crane. So they weren't all uniformly the same size or whatever, but whatever she could, she would use to fold. And that was the first time I heard that one, and I was kind of taken aback by that as well. So, it was a good thing, it came, went. Two countries now are allies. And I think, in the name of peace, there's all kinds of wars going all over the place. But when you look at the devastation these types of things cause, and you have to take some time to kind of look back and say, well, maybe we shouldn't be having too many of these types of things and killing people and humanity. But I think overall, my message today is that I appreciate the opportunity to come in and share some things with you folks today. But also, let's remember what Sadako, her story stood for, and what that story has become internationally. And that is the story of peace around the world and harmony. And I think you have that peace kanji over there, right around the corner there in your temple. So thank you very much for having me today. I hope you have a nice day, and let's all pray for peace around the world. Namo Amida Butsu.
Well, thank you very much, Art. And despite what you say, yourself and Wayne Meow, you folks were on our top of our list to ask to come speak to us. You guys were not the bottom of the barrel. And I hope one day, Wayne would be able to come and be our speaker too. But thank you very much. And thank you very much for sharing your family story. I think that's a good way for us to share, remember, and not make the mistakes of the past. And I'm sure a lot of us, our families, we have stories to share. And I think it's important that we learn and we try to share and try to capture and memorialize these stories. And Kona Japanese Civic Association, we're writing another old time Kona story book, and we have the opportunity to share our stories. And I know Mr. Como, I think Carol talked to you about that book. So it's a good way for us to share, remember, and learn. So thank you very much, Art.